Okay, so before we dive into today, I'll just do today's Sephira, right? We're counting 49 days till Shavuot, till we get the Omer. Uh-oh. Barbara, you are sharing your screen with us. Let's stop that. Even though we love your screen. Okay, so today is the 26th day of the Omer counting. So it's week 4, day 5. And the attributes of ourselves that we're working on today in Hebrew is Hod of Netzach, which is humility in endurance. So yielding, which is a result of humility, is an essential element of enduring. Standing fast can sometimes be a formula for destruction. The oak, lacking the ability to bend in a hurricane, is uprooted. The reed, which yields to the wind, survives without problem. Do I know when to yield? Out of strength, not fear. Why am I often afraid to yield? Those are questions to ask ourselves. Endurance is fueled by inner strength. Hod of Netzach is the humble recognition and acknowledgement that the capacity to endure and prevail comes from the soul that God gave each person. This humility does not compromise the drive of endurance. On the contrary, it intensifies it because human endurance can go only so far and endure only so much, whereas endurance that comes from the divine soul is limitless. I think this is very apropos. Do I attribute my success solely to my own strength and determination? Am I convinced that I am all-powerful due to my level of endurance? Where do I get the strength at times when everything seems so bleak? An exercise for the day. When you awake, we did this already, so you could do it. We already woke up, so you could do this now. Acknowledge God for giving you a soul with the extraordinary power and versatility to endure despite trying challenges. This will allow you to draw energy and strength for the entire day. I love that. I think that is very apropos. Okay, so today we're going to do Ruth as our heroine, like in her entirety. I know we started it last week, and I figured instead of doing it the other half and then starting another woman and kind of always having half a lady, half a woman in our class, I thought that it would be better to just do Ruth, and we can do her maybe more fully and really discuss her, and then next week we'll do somebody else. Can everyone hear me okay? And see me okay? Okay, it just, something popped up that said unstable internet, so I just wanted to double check on that. Okay, so before we continue where we left off, I'll just do a little bit of a recap in case you weren't here last class so that we can just catch you up to speed. So we're talking about Ruth, and one of the reasons for that is, and we're going to talk about the connection, but we read the book of Ruth. Many have a custom to read the Megillah of Ruth, the book of Ruth, on the holiday of Shavuot, which is the next Jewish holiday coming up when we receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. So Ruth was a Moabite princess, okay, the granddaughter of the Moabite king named Eglon. And in Israel, there was a huge famine, one of like the 10 biggest famines in Israel's history. And there was a Jewish family, Elimelech and his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons, Machlon and Chilion, that left Israel. They were living in Beit Lechem, and they left Israel because of this immense famine, and they went to go settle temporarily in the land of Moab, a neighboring nation that was actually, has been, and we're going to talk about this more, enemies of the Jewish people. And one of the reasons that they left, Elimelech left because he was very wealthy. He was also like a Jewish leader at the time. And there was a verse, this is, if you have your handout, this was text number 5. The Midrash tells us that he was like thinking, well, if there's a famine and I'm very wealthy, everyone's going to come begging me for food and provisions and help. And so like to protect his own wealth and status, he left. And he ends up actually getting punished for that. I think someone asked me last class if that's like the reason he died. And I did find a commentary that says he was punished for that kind of like not standing up for that responsibility that he had and kind of like shirking responsibility as a leader and just going to take care of himself. And that is a reason that he died. So he died in Moab, And Naomi now, she has her two sons, Machlon and Chilion, and they marry two Moabite princesses who converted. So Ruth and Orpah are the two Moabite princesses that Machlon and Chilion marry. And then Machlon and Chilion, the sons, they also die. So now we're at this point where Naomi is grieving, right? She doesn't have her husband. She doesn't have her two sons. She has these two Moabite princess daughter-in-laws who are converted to Judaism. And she, after 10 years of being there, she decides, the famine is over and it's time to return back to the land of Israel. And she's at this place where, right, she's going to go back, but she's penniless. She doesn't have anything. She abandoned her people. So what kind of welcome was she kind of, expecting to come back to? She realized she's not in a great position, not financially, not status wise. And Ruth and Orpah start coming with her on her journey. We're following you back to Israel. And she tells them, what are you, do you realize you're giving up a life of wealth and status? No, Elizabeth, they did not have. Elizabeth asked in the chat whether either of the sons had children. And the answer is no, neither of them had children. And that actually comes into the story, as we're going to see a little later. So, she's saying don't come with me. You're coming back into poverty. I have no idea how I'm going to be received when I go back, right? In a sense, we abandoned our people. And she really encourages them, just go back. Here are your princesses. You have wealth. You have status. And at first they continue, but then Orpah goes back. And Ruth, this is kind of where we had paused, I think in last class, in text number 6. We have this very powerful exchange between Naomi and Ruth. And it's very famous words that Ruth says to her mother-in-law, right? Where you go, I go. Where you live, I live. Where you die, I will die, right? She's just I am with you. And this is her 100% saying, I want to give up a life of opulence, of luxury, of status, of wealth. None of that means anything to me because I want to be Jewish and have one God and be like you and be like your people and really follow you. And so that's very powerful for Ruth to say to Naomi. She's essentially really giving up so much, especially in two accounts, right? Because her original Moabite people are going to reject her, clearly. Number one, already for converting to Judaism and marrying into a Jewish family. But number two, for, when she actually leaves, it's there's, the point of no return. There's no coming back. And then when she's in Israel, she might be rejected as well, which we're going to talk about why that would be, right? So I said that the nation of Moab were enemies of the Jewish people. So just the fact that she was a converted Moabitess, or however you would pronounce that, is almost stigmatizing her. And we're going to talk about why and what that would look like. So for Orpah, oh, yes, Harriet, go ahead.
I have a question because I was reading what's here.
Yeah.
And I always like this. Your people shall be my people and your God, my God. It seems to me if she has converted, it should be your people are my people.
Instead of shall be my people.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I just thought of that.
So what's actually interesting is that moment. So one of the conditions of a proper conversion is your sincerity at the time of taking on conversion, right? So what's really interesting is there's actually two opinions about whether they converted before they married Machlon and Chilion or not. But okay, let's just say they did convert before they married them, right? Now is the moment where their conversion is being tested, so to speak. In other words, Orpah went back. And Ruth is saying at that moment when she has this opportunity to go back versus to continue with Naomi into Israel, she's basically saying that was her moment of taking it on 100% fully. And so it could be that if that, I would have to look it up in the Hebrew to see if that was the exact accurate translation, your God shall be my God. But it's this is the moment where her dedication and her choice was really put to the test. And she decided, like, I am 100% fully taking this on with everything that it means. So I think that's also interesting. And we can understand simply, right? Orpah's decision seemed like the easy one. It seemed like the very easy, like we would all understand why Orpah would choose that. And with Ruth, it's much more astonishing because she knew what she was giving up and she knew what she was going to, and yet she still made this choice. And we had this discussion last week about this idea of like freedom and choice versus duty and responsibility. And 100% that Judaism values freedom and choice, but we actually value duty and responsibility above that. And so not in like a blaming way, but if you look at Elimelech and Orpah, and later in the story, we're going to get there, someone named Ploni, they all did what makes sense, right? Elimelech left Israel to go settle somewhere else to protect his wealth and his status, so to speak, right? So, and he had the freedom and the choice to do that, and yet he was held responsible. That really someone of his character and stature should have, so to speak, right, stayed there and risen to the responsibility and the duty of taking care of his own people. And here also, like Orpah did what makes so much sense, and what we would, like, you can ask yourself, I think it's just an interesting question, like, what do you think I would have chosen in that scenario, right? And why? And what Orpah did makes so much sense. And yet, Ruth goes on to do something. She takes on this responsibility and this duty out of her own decision, and then look what she merits, right? Like, she becomes the great-grandmother of King David. And from King David comes Mashiach, right? Like, her lineage is incredible. And Orpah, right? Like where did her lineage take her? And also Ploni, which we're going to talk about later in the story. So if you're confused about that, but again, like Ruth and Boaz, their lineage versus Ploni, we don't know anything about. So
Adina, yeah. I'm sorry. Orpah's, may I interrupt? I'm sorry.
Please.
Okay, Orpah's lineage is Goliath. She is this, I think I mentioned this last week.
Yeah.
So it's so ironic, the whole layout from the family and how they all in the end come together in not such a good way.
Yes.
With David killing Goliath.
Yeah, you're right. That is fascinating. And that's like kind of a whole other topic, but it's amazing. And welcome to my mom who just joined us. All right. So where we are. Okay. So we read text number 6, which is this very powerful exchange between Ruth and Naomi. And where we are now, right, is them coming back into the land of Israel together. Now, I don't remember if we read this last week, so we'll just start with practical application number 3 on page 7. Oh, no, on your handout, it's probably not page 7. Hold on. On page 3 of your handout. So if you have the handout, it's on page 3, practical application number 3. Do you want to read that for us, Andrea? Did I just catch you off guard?
No, that's fine. I can read. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I did something to my Zoom and it's tiny, so I don't know what I did.
Well,
okay.
I spotlighted my video so that you all see me big, so that might be.
Right, but the big part went away. I'll figure it out. Everyone's tiny. Practical application number 3. When Naomi pressed Orpah and Ruth to return to Moab rather than continue with her to Israel, Orpah conceded while Ruth insisted on continuing with Naomi, though this meant forfeiting a royal life of comfort and luxury for one of poverty and isolation. Ruth was fueled by a passionate desire to be part of the Jewish people and their mission. We can learn from Ruth how sometimes we need to give up on creature comforts for the sake of something greater.
Right. Okay, thank you. And that's exactly what we discussed before, right? This idea of like something greater than me. Like, what would prompt somebody to give up their creature comforts, their freedom, their choice, like that, for something else? And it's this idea that I'm living for something higher. I'm living for something greater. Okay, So before we continue the story of like where we're at, I just want to preface where we come next to with two ideas to make it just very clear to contextualize the events that are coming up. So the first part we have to understand is in text number 7, we're going to a different place in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, where it tells us, and I'll read it, no Ammonite or Moabite, not even a 10th generation descendant of those nations, may ever be admitted to the assembly of God. In other words, they cannot convert. This is on account of the fact that they did not come to greet you with bread and water on your way when you left Egypt, and also because they hired Balaam, son of Beor from Petor, in Aram Naharaim to curse you. Okay, so we have this like commandment in the Torah that if you're an Ammonite or a Moabite, you are not allowed to convert because of like essential Jewish qualities are kindness and compassion and non-cruelty and things like that. And they specifically were, first of all, they're actually like cousins of the Jewish people because Ammon and Moab came from Lot, and Lot is Abraham, the first Jew, his nephew. So we're actually related, but they specifically did not extend any help to the Jewish people when they left Egypt, and they even went out of their way to be cruel to the Jewish people, to hire someone to curse them, whole other story. So there's this mitzvah to not allow them to convert. Kind of sounds interesting as a mitzvah, but it's like a commandment. They weren't allowed to convert. Now, the Talmud tells us this ban only applied to male members of Ammon and Moab, not to females. And that's in text number 8. Maybe someone else could read. Anne, do you want to read that? Anne Meisner from Seattle. Hold on, let me unmute you. Or maybe you have to unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Better?
Number 8.
Okay.
Better.
Okay. So I'm juggling between 2 screens. I'm juggling between the Zoom screen and also the text. So now
Okay.
I'll read. Okay.
Okay.
An Ammonite is excluded from marrying into the assembly of God, but not an Ammonitis, an Amethyst, whatever.
Yeah.
A Moabite, but not a Moabitess. Although normally when the Torah employs the masculine sense in the course of an instruction, it refers equally to males and females. This instance is different because the verse stipulates the reason for the prohibition, the fact that they did not come to greet you with bread and water. It is a convention for the men, but not the women, to greet travelers with provisions.
Thank you. Okay, so the Talmud tells us, right, that this prohibition against conversion for the Ammonite or Moabite nations only applied to the men and not to the women, even though technically, usually when there's like something written in the male tense in the Torah, it applies to females as well. But here, not, because it was the men that were cruel to the Jewish people, that didn't give them bread and water. Okay, very similar to like the reason for having a minyan, right? Like what's the reason that it's when in prayer 10 Jewish men over the age of bar mitzvah get together for prayer, right? It's because of the story of the 10 spies, that there was 10 Jewish male leaders who came back with a bad report about the land of Israel. This is another story. I'm just kind of showing this correlation. And so to rectify that mistake of these 10 male Jewish leaders, 10 Jewish males need to get together every time they pray for a positive reason, right? So because women had nothing to do with that mistake, women don't have this requirement to be part of a minyan and to count in a minyan. Okay, again, nothing to do with not counting, just we had nothing to do with that mistake, so we have nothing to do with that rectification. So same thing here, women were 100% allowed to convert. The thing is, this wasn't, even though this was a part of oral law all the way from Mount Sinai, this was passed down always, it wasn't very well known because Ammonite and Moabite people didn't want to convert. They were enemies of the Jewish people. So it wasn't well known that this prohibition only applied to men and not to women. So because it wasn't like this well-known concept, it was possible for Ruth, who is now a Moabite convert, to come back to the land of Israel and still be stigmatized because, you know, she's from Moab, that nation that is like enemies of the Jewish people that have treated us so terribly. Okay, so I just wanted to like give you that one concept. And here's another one in text number 9. This other concept in marriage. Do you want to read that for us, Sharon?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please do.
Just kind of a tiny side issue, just a confusion for me is when they talking about the men who in fact did not come to greet you with bread and water, and that it was the convention for men. The only, I'm sure there's other times, but the time that stands out for me is, you remember when the strangers came to the tent of Sarah and Abraham, and Sarah had laid out a beautiful meal. It was technically Sarah who was greeting them, but is this a physical going out to meeting, different kind of a thing for the man?
Yeah, but also it wasn't Sarah who went out to greet them. If you remember, Abraham was sitting outside his tent waiting for guests to come. When he saw them, he went to Sarah and said, guests are coming, can you prepare a meal for them? So just to fix that.
Oh, but that was teamwork in that case.
Teamwork, 100%. They were the first Chabad house, by the way, in the desert, finding people who need some food and nourishment, and they were there for them. Yes, 100% teamwork. So, okay, so just to clarify that. But yes, if you think about it, like in those times or whatever it is, right, it would be like, it's like dangerous journeying. Even if you remember last class when we talked about Tzipporah, right? Moses brought Tzipporah and his 2 sons back from Midian to Egypt, and Aaron comes out to greet them and is like, what are you bringing your daughter and, your wife and your sons into this mix, right? Aaron came out to greet them and was like, send them back home and keep them safe, right? So it was kind of like, you know, in the desert especially, like what are the kinds of things you can encounter? And so yes, it would be like the men that would come and, you know, travel and greet each other and whatever. Okay, so text number 9, another concept in Torah that we want to talk about, just to clarify again what's going to happen next in that story. Do you want to read that for us, Jolie? Text number 9.
All righty. Levirate marriage touches upon a great secret of the Torah. The ancient sages, even before the giving of the Torah, were aware of the great benefit for the soul of the deceased of having his brother wed the widow, in that to an extent the progeny of that union perpetuates the soul of the deceased man. The brother is the first in line to marry the widow and takes precedence over all other relatives. But if he is unable to do so, it is beneficial for any relative who is an inheritor of the deceased to do so. The closer the relative, the greater the benefit. The early Jewish sages were cognizant of this and introduced the practice of levirate marriage for all inheritors, except for such relatives, such as the deceased's father, whose union with the widow is prohibited by the Torah. This marriage was known as geula,
Geula.
Yeah. Or redemption.
Okay, so this concept is that according to Jewish law, if there is a married couple that remains childless and the husband dies and there's no children, there is a mitzvah for the next closest relative, which would be his brother, to marry this woman. Now, if they don't want to marry each other, right, if it's not feasible or it's not desired, they don't have, so that's called yibum, the mitzvah of like the brother, if there's like a brother of this deceased husband, right, like husband, to marry the wife. That's called yibum. And if for whatever reason they don't want to, or it's not feasible or whatever it is, then they perform another ceremony called chalitza. Okay, so nowadays yibum does not apply, but chalitza is still performed. Like if someone's in this scenario, they would just do this this thing called chalitza, and then they like annul this mitzvah of having the deceased husband's brother marry the wife. Does that make sense? If I said that in some clear way. Okay. So, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Adina, did you say that no longer applies today?
Yibum doesn't apply. Chalitza applies. Like in other words, you would still perform, like if there was this scenario, you would still perform chalitza to like annul the need for this. But we don't, like yibum is not really necessary today.
So it doesn't happen. People don't marry the brother of a deceased man. Women don't marry the brother of a deceased man anymore. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. They would just usually perform the chalitza ceremony.
We'll have to do that though.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, okay, so here we are. Okay, so now we're going back to the story of Ruth, right? Okay, so now Naomi comes back to Beis Lechem, where she was living before, with Ruth. Nobody comes out to greet them. Nobody comes out to offer them food. Nobody, like, you know, no grand welcoming party, nothing like that, which is what Naomi anticipated, but it is sad, I think. So there's clearly like this stigma of, number one, you deserted us 10 years ago, and number two, now you have this Moabite daughter-in-law, right? So we don't hear of anyone offering them shelter or food or a kind word or anything like that. So now how are they going to support themselves? So Ruth, I was hoping my mother-in-law would be on today's Torah Tea, but because, by the way, this is like the best story in the Torah of mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship, right? Like all the stigma, no, like, because, you know, there's all these jokes of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law and all of that. I have a wonderful relationship with my mother-in-law. I love her dearly. And my mother is on this call today, so love that too. And Ruth, the relationship between Ruth and Naomi is so beautiful, and we can learn so much from it. So anyway, so I would give a shout out to my mother-in-law, but she's not on the call. Hopefully she'll watch the replay to get her a shout out. So anyway, so Ruth, right? She, like, Naomi is older, and she wants to take care of her mother-in-law, and she says, like, you stay here. I'm gonna go out to the fields and find food. Okay, Maddie asked in the chat, Adina, is there anything in the Torah or Judaism about holding grudges or judging others? Yeah, neither of them are allowed, if that's what you mean. There is, you can't take revenge. Don't judge your fellow until you're in their place. So definitely a concept about judging. Not holding a grudge. I forget the Hebrew of that. Lose income is not to take revenge. Forget the Hebrew for not holding a grudge, but all of it is in Judaism 100%. That being said,
so I was going to ask, if that's the case, then how come when Ruth and Naomi arrived back that everyone was behaving like that and holding a grudge from all these years ago when they left? How was that? What's that about?
Yeah, well, what's it about that it says clearly in the Torah not to worship idols? And if you go through Jewish history, there are so many periods where the Jewish people were like widespread worshiping idols. Nowadays, we don't have that concept because that, like, taiva, that desire, was taken away from the world. But you could find over and over in history things where, like, what is this about? Right?
Oh, you mean so they were doing it even though it wasn't necessarily the right thing?
It wasn't the right thing, not at all. But I'm saying we're humans, and God gave this
Right.
to humans. In other words, like, here's what I expect and want from you, and I'm giving you free choice, and I'm giving you both a godly soul and an animalistic soul, and I'm giving you like godly desires
Right.
and an evil inclination, right? So that you choose to do what's right. So yeah,
Okay,
I'm not like condoning anyone else's behavior here, but that is what happened. So, okay, so Ruth decides she's going to go out to the fields. Now, beautifully, what we do have is so many mitzvot that are there to protect the poor and the vulnerable and, right, widows and orphans and all of that. So we have this beautiful mitzvah that we're like, okay, so agriculture, right, was a big, huge way of, it still is, right, a way of people supporting themselves. And so there was a mitzvah that any person who owned, like, farmed a land or had land, right, when he would go do the harvest, there's leket, shikha, and peah, okay? So if he's harvesting and he drops something that while he's harvesting or while any of his workers are harvesting, they have to leave it. They can't pick it up. You leave it for poor people. There's peah, which is the corners of your field, like peyot, right, are like the side locks that boys and men have a mitzvah for. It's like, means like the corners, right? So the corners of your head, the corners of your field had to be left. You weren't allowed to harvest the corners of your field. That was also left for poor people to come and gather. And laket shikha, and shikha, if you, like, forgot a certain portion, you're like, oh wait, I forgot to, like, harvest that side of my field or whatever, too bad. Okay, so that's all besides for 10%, right? Giving Meiser 10% of all of our income, or 10% of your field, all 10% of your produce, all of that always automatically goes to charity. So because of that mitzvah, Ruth was like, okay, let me go to someone's field and find out where I could, glean and get from what's left over. Is that where peor originated from? Not the concept. Like, in other words, the Hebrew word is the same, but it says it in the Torah that men should leave the corners of their base of their head. So it's the same root, but it doesn't originate from the field. And Diane asked, what kind of reincarnation did I mention? Nothing about reincarnation. I'm trying to think what word I said that might have sounded like that. Nothing about reincarnation. Okay, so Ruth decides to go out to the field, and she comes across this man named Boaz, who was very welcoming to her. He was very much like, embraced her with open arms, figuratively, like, come, take. He told his workers to be kind to her, to let her take as much as she needs and wants, I think they even had this conversation where he was like, take the leked. She's like, what's that? And then he explains, and then take the shikha, this other mitzvah. And she's like, what's that? And he explains, and peah, like all the different parts. He was just like, take and take. And she felt so comfortable. She would just always come to Boaz's field and feel really comfortable to take what she needed there. So, okay, so she comes home to her mother-in-law, Naomi, right? And that's how they ate and they fed themselves and everything. And she tells her mother-in-law about her encounter with Boaz and how gracious and kind he was. And Naomi actually informs Ruth and says, he's actually related to us. He is a nephew or cousin, hold on. I think a nephew of Elimelech, of Naomi's husband. So a cousin of Ruth through marriage. Okay, so she says he's actually a close relative, and he is able to do this mitzvah of redeeming Ruth, right? Yibum, marrying, since Ruth's husband died childless, Boaz could actually be your husband. And Boaz was not married, did not have any kids. And so Naomi decides kind of like to be the shachin, okay? So because they keep meeting each other, Ruth and Boaz, but Boaz doesn't propose or anything. And so Naomi decides she's going to be the shachin here, and she's going to make this happen. So it's near the end of the harvest season, and she tells Ruth to go beautify herself, go down to the field at night at the end of like the whole harvesting, go to the threshing floor because that's where Boaz slept. And he would like guard his harvested crop because there was a lot of thieves in those days and a lot of thieves. So he would guard his crop. And Ruth listens to Naomi. And in text number 10, we get the biblical narrative from Megillat Ruth of what happened here. So Sharon, do you want to read that for us? Text number 10. Oh, sorry. There we go. You're unmuted.
I'm sorry. And it came to pass at midnight, and the man quaked and was taken around. And behold, a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, who are you? And she said, I am Ruth, your handmaid. And you shall spread your skirt over your handmaid, for you are a near kinsman. And he said, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. Your latest act of kindness is greater than the first, not to follow the young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. All that you say I will do for you, for the entire gate of my people know that you are a valiant woman. And now, indeed, I am near kinsman, but there is a kinsman closer than I. Stay overnight and it will come to pass in the morning that if he redeem you, well, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, I will redeem you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning.
Okay. So Ruth essentially, what's the word? Proposes to Boaz. I think we're seeing a little bit of a pattern of this, right? We kind of there was like an opinion that Zipporah proposed to Moses. I proposed to Menachem. So, we could change all the societal norms. All right. So So Ruth basically comes in and says to Boaz, like, you are like next in line and we could get married. And Boaz actually said, well, there is another family member, and he calls him Plony. Now, Plony is like the equivalent of so-and-so, like saying John Doe. Like, we don't even know his name. So he's kind of saying like, well, there's this other person that is actually a closer relative, I think an uncle, and the uncle would be closer than like this level of cousin. And so we need to check with him first to see if he wants this mitzvah, right? So Boaz is not like he kind of is like, let me first make sure. Like, I don't want to like, jump the gun and then make a mistake. I want to like first clear that up, see what he says. And then, and then like once that's like annulled, then we can get married. Okay. So he doesn't like immediately agree to marry Ruth because he wants to first like clear that. Okay, so in the morning, Boaz approaches Plony, this person, and the verse talks about how he gathers 10 men and he has this conversation, and the Talmud explains he did it publicly so as to like reinforce this little known rule, right, that a Moabitess, a female woman from Moab, is allowed to convert, right? To be like, we have to, like, there's nothing wrong with Ruth, like there's not, there's no stigma, there's no reason to like deny her or anything like that. And so he kind of clarified that halacha, that piece of Jewish law. And first he spoke about property, saying like Naomi's going to sell the family property and that would first go to you if you want to buy it. And Plony, right? So like that's like first cleared up. And then Plony was basically like, he doesn't want to marry Ruth. And he says like, he's worried about, again, stigma and marring his family name and the idea. So like he gives this up. So again, that's why at the beginning I said he would kind of fall into the same category of like Elimelech and Orpah and Plony, of like these people that thought more of themselves in that moment. And again, I'm trying to say it without judgment, because the lesson I want us to take from it is, again, this message that we get from Torah of like rising to the occasion and thinking beyond our own immediate selves, but about, again, like duty or responsibility or something beyond us. So anyway, so text number 11, the verses continue. Let's see, who has it? Harriet, do you want to read that for us? No?
I'm muting. Okay.
Okay, there you go.
And Boaz said, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased, you have bought it to preserve the name of the deceased on his heritage. And Boaz said, on the day that you buy that field from the hand of Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased, you have bought it to preserve the name of the deceased on his heritage.
Sorry, that's a double two lines.
Okay. Says same. Okay.
Okay. So in the presence of 10 men, they perform this, they perform this like transaction, right? Where he like gives up his claim on the land, and Boaz then marries Ruth. Okay. So, which I think is, again, a huge testament to Boaz, right? Because we all know we fall into these things of like societal norms and the status quo and thinking what are other people going to think and all of that. And Boaz didn't do any of that, right? Boaz was really taken with Ruth's humility and modesty, the way he saw her behave in the fields, the way she was just like really dignified. And he knew this Jewish law that a Moabite woman is allowed to convert, and he saw her sincerity and her genuineness, that's the word, and he essentially did this yibum, this idea of like redeeming the next in line or whatever. So, and what we see from that is also what came from there, right? So we know that they gave birth to a son named Oved. Oved had Yishai, and Yishai had David, and from David comes a lot of other great people and Mashiach. So it's like the lineage that came from this union is so powerful and so beautiful. And at the same time, Plony was not willing to risk this for himself. He wasn't willing to risk his name or his legitimacy or his status or whatever it was, which I'm not going to say is a crime, right? Like, again, can we judge him? Like, can we all understand the position he was in and why he would make that choice? And yet at the same time, we want to encourage ourselves to like look deeper and see something more there. So, okay. So then text number 12, we get, I just kind of said this outside, but we get to the next part. Do you want to read that for us, Rita?
And Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he was intimate with her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And Naomi took the child and placed him in her bosom, and she became his nurse. And the women neighbors gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David.
Okay. So that really like concludes the biblical part of this story, right? We kind of like see the full story and how it comes full circle. But what we do get here, okay, so let's go to practical application. Practical application number 4. Do you want to read that for us, Anne Molson? Do you have? Yeah. Okay.
Practical application number 4.
Mm-hmm.
The prohibition against marrying Moabite converts did not extend to female converts, but this exception was not well known. In ancient times, it was the practice for the closest relative available to wed, redeem, the widow of their childless deceased next of kin. Boaz believed that it was his responsibility to fulfill his obligation to Naomi's family and to Ruth, despite her origins. Plony, however, was unwilling to risk his legacy by marrying Ruth. The union of Boaz and Ruth resulted in the birth of King David, changing the course of Jewish history. Doing what we know is right, without fear of public opinion, can result in life-changing, far-reaching effects.
Thank you. Okay, so Maddie just asked in the chat, did it say that Ruth's son was born to a nurse by Naomi? So like a what's the word? I'm losing my word. Like Naomi was cared for. I don't want to use the word nanny, but was really involved in her grandson's upbringing, right? It's it's her first grandson. So I think it means more in a beautiful way, and that they were crediting Naomi also for this union and for this grandson that she was having, right? In a beautiful way, not in a way of she's not, he's not Ruth's, it's Naomi's or something like that. Adrian.
That was my question.
Oh, that was your question. Okay. Okay. So now we want to know, okay, this is an incredible story. We get this idea of what Ruth is like and what her personality is like and what's so special about her. But what is the connection? Why would we read the book of Ruth, Megillat Ruth, on Shavuot? What does the story of a Moabite princess have to do with the giving of the Torah? Okay, so some of the explanations given, you have this on your handout, but I think these are really beautiful. So number one is Ruth personally accepted the Torah when she decided to continue with Naomi. So too, we receive and accept the Torah anew every Shavuot. Ruth is regarded as the quintessential sincere convert, having joined the Jewish nation with no ulterior motive whatsoever. When the Jews received the Torah, they all converted to Judaism. This is one of the reasons why we eat dairy on Shavuot. I think this is fascinating. As new converts, we couldn't eat the meat that was slaughtered the day earlier by non-Jews, by themselves, which is one of the many reasons. I just think that's kind of fascinating. One of the reasons why we would eat dairy. So they're becoming new people. They're becoming a people where before it was optional, and now they're taking it on as we're doing this. We're taking this on as obligation and responsibility and duty, and not just on if we feel like it or if we don't, or right, a conditional sort of relationship with God. And the same way that Ruth took that on herself. So number 2, King David, the great-grandson of Ruth and Boaz, was born and died on Shavuot. Another connection. Ruth demonstrated willingness to suffer deprivations for the sake of Torah. This is a message we must take to heart on the holiday when we commemorate receiving the Torah, just how strong our commitment must be. And number 4, Shavuot is also referred to in the Torah as the harvest festival. And the bulk of the book of Ruth transpired during the harvest season. And number 5, kindness and charity, Gemilat Chasadim, are the foundations of Torah, an essential theme of the book of Ruth, right? We have all these mitzvot in there of charity too, right? The leket, the shechad, the peah, the corners and the forgotten sheaves and all of that. So just a personal point to bring in here, which I think every year on the holiday of Shavuot, I talk about this, how both of my parents became observant in their 20s. And Mom, you can unmute yourself and pop in here if I say anything wrong. But my father always says that the holiday of Shavuot is very meaningful to him because people who become observant and didn't grow up that way, they all have their own journey of what inspired them or what got them there or whatever. And my father always says that for him, it was a very intellectual journey, right? It wasn't like he went to someone's Shabbat table and just loved it and was like, oh, I want to raise my family this way. For him, it was like, either this is like the Torah is godly, or it's written by a bunch of rabbis and made up, and I'm going to prove which one it is. And so he asked questions and really challenged all of his teachers. And he went to yeshiva. He went away to yeshiva in Los Angeles, and again was just very challenging to get to the root of answering all of his questions. And then he went to Morristown. He went to New York, right? And it was a whole journey for him, very intellectual. And he says that before the holiday of Shavuot was kind of he was getting his questions answered, and he was getting more and getting more and getting more. And he kind of came to this point where he's like, I still have to take a leap of faith, right? I can't just keep this as an intellectual journey, right? Like the Jewish people by Shavuot, what did they say when God said, do you want the Torah? They weren't like, well, first explain it to me. First, let me rationally understand every piece of it. First, let me we'll take the parts we like, right? It was their response or our response. We were all there on a soul level, if not a physical level, right? Was nasa v'nishma. We're going to do this, and then we'll learn about it, and then we'll figure it out. And so my father says, the turning point for him was before the holiday of Shavuot. He was like, nasa v'nishma, I'm going to take this on, and I'm going to keep learning. And he became fully observant. And to this day, my father's favorite activity, other than being with his grandchildren, is to learn Torah. Did I get that right, Mom? I hope, if you're still in here.
Very, very nicely put.
Okay. All right. So anyway, I always think about the holiday of Shavuot, and I think that that's also really powerful here with what we're learning about Ruth and kind of her journey. So anyway, so we see this very clear, hold on, let me check the chat again. Oh, you're welcome, Elizabeth. We see this very clear pattern of different points in the story where there's decision points, right? Really powerful points where it was which way are you going to turn, right? For Orpah, was she going to go back or continue? For Ruth, was she going to go back or continue? For Boaz, was he going to worry about himself or utilize this opportunity, right? There's a lot of points where people had very big decisions to make, and the difference between a voluntary decision versus an obligatory decision. That didn't really make sense, but where something is put on you and therefore you do it, or you choose it and therefore you do it. And perhaps, there could be lots of differences, right? What is the key trait that distinguishes someone who selflessly embraces responsibility from someone who doesn't, right? And it's just something interesting to think about, right? Thinking about ourselves versus thinking about others, thinking about a bigger picture versus thinking about my own intellect as the highest source that I'm gonna look at. That idea, we didn't create ourselves, and so maybe I'm here for a bigger purpose than just what I think about me and all of that. And I think there's something much deeper to all of this, which we kind of spoke about, which is connected to the holiday of Shavuot. What the Jewish people did by Mount Sinai, again, was nasa v'nishma. That was their response. It was God, you want this? Okay, we're taking this on. We'll figure it out. We'll learn it. We'll understand whatever we can. Whatever we don't understand, we'll still do, right? But not let me first, here's all the conditions, or let me first figure this out. So interesting, this is a Talmud, text number 13. I think it kind of explains this concept very interestingly. Do you want to read that for us, Adrian?
Rabbi Yosef, who was blind, said, I used to say, if anyone tells me that the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that a blind person is exempt from all the Torah's commandments, I will make a festive banquet for the rabbis, because that would mean that I am not obligated to do the mitzvot, and yet I fulfill them anyhow. Now, however, I have heard what Rabbi Hanina said, that one who is obligated and fulfills is greater than the one who fulfills, though not obligated to do so. On the contrary, therefore, if anyone tells me that the halakha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, I will make a festive banquet for the rabbis.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting, right? So like his original reasoning seems obvious, right? Like one who does a mitzvah despite not being obligated to do so, right, demonstrates a level of commitment than one who is just like, okay, I have to do this, so I'm doing it, right? But the reasoning behind his second statement is like really this idea, right, that if God takes something that was once optional and then makes it obligatory, which is what happened by the giving of the Torah, right? That's what he did in Mount Sinai. He was essentially saying like before it's optional, so to speak, like people willingly kept Torah and mitzvot, as we see. We had that source at the beginning, and Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Moses and all these, right? Moses and the circumcision, everything like willingly keeping Torah and mitzvot versus like now this is an indispensable part of creation. Now I'm letting you know that like I need this from you, right? This is my complete desire for creating the world and bringing you all to this point. So if we understand it in that way, then it's not, the Shavuot doesn't just celebrate the importance, the giving of the Torah, but it's also our important role in creation, where it's like now we became essentially necessary, right? Where God's saying like, this is like the whole purpose of creation, and now like I need this from you, right? Which like the needing it, it's kind of like the difference between, you could think if a parent says to a child, right, go to sleep whenever you want, stay out as late as you want, versus like, you know, curfew is at 10 o'clock and bedtime is at 11 o'clock or whatever, right? The parent that puts on obligation or duty or responsibility on their child clearly cares more about their child than the parent that's like, do whatever you want, right? It kind of almost like, even though there's less, there's no parameter and rules, it also shows like a lack of caring about what you do. So here it's the same thing. Like this is God's way of saying like, listen, Jewish people, right? Like I have a vision for the world. I have a reason that I created this world. I have a reason I created you, and you are essential in fulfilling that vision that I have for the world's creation. So that's what we're celebrating. We're almost like celebrating our obligation here. We're celebrating the fact that what we do, what we think, what we eat, how we speak, how we live our lives matter to God. And then once you look at it that way, like of course the Jewish people are going to say like Nasa v'nishma, like yes, we want everything we do to matter that so much to you and to like be part of your like cosmic role for creation. Okay, so now, so text number 14, right? Every single blessing that we say before performing a mitzvah, our blessing is, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who has made us holy with his commandments and commanded us to, right? So, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav. We're thanking God for giving us commandments, right? We're thanking God for making us obligated, which might sound, again, like, why would we thank God for that? Like, right? Back to like the freedom, the choice, the live whatever we want. Like we live in a world where, right? Like, I don't know, this is an old slogan, but like YOLO, you only live once, so do whatever you want. Like that whole like, younger generation way of like, it's my life and I could do whatever I want, versus like, it's actually not our life because we didn't create ourselves and we live for a purpose higher than just my own intellect and my own. Obviously there's a mix there. God gave us free choice, and like, of course our desires and our wants matter and all of that. But here, every single bracha that we say, every single blessing, we're like showing how incredibly significant and powerful every single one of our own actions are. And this is a truth that Boaz and Ruth were very aware of, that like what they did and the choices they make, and that their marriage, so much would come from that. That it wasn't just like a personal, like, what do I feel like here in this moment? Or it's not like just like this romance story or anything like that. They saw the like scale of history that would change from their own willingness to forego their own comforts and their own luxuries, right? Ruth by leaving Moab and going with Naomi. Boaz by not like being scared of social stigma or anything that it might mean if he married Ruth. Like both of them like gave that up, again, because they saw this bigger picture. Okay, so practical application number 5. That's where this leads us to. Let's see, Vivian, do you want to read that for us?
Okay. So Ruth and Boaz understood that fulfilling one's mission and purpose trumps personal autonomy. Furthermore, they realized the great importance of their every action. We learn this lesson from the giving of the Torah. When God made mitzvahs obligatory, he was in effect telling us that what we do is absolutely indispensable to his vision for creation. Recognizing the great privilege of performing mitzvah, the Jews ran to accept the Torah, even though that meant giving up many freedoms.
Yeah, you want to just go straight on to practical application number 6?
Elimelech, Orpah, and Ploni shirked, is that the right one?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
Shirked their responsibilities in favor of perceived personal comfort and well-being, while Ruth and Boaz chose duty over personal comfort and well-being. Ruth and Boaz understood that fulfilling one's mission trumps personal choice, and that their every action toward fulfilling this purpose was cosmically significant.
Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, again, I don't mean to say this in a way that like that we don't cherish our own freedom, right? We're not talking about like dictatorship and totalitarianism and all of that, right? Our freedom is extremely important to us. And I think it has much more to do with embracing the idea that what we do and the choices we make in our life really do matter. And we see that this is like a very bold statement in the Mishnah, text 15. Every person is obligated to say, the world was created just for me, right? So, and in that sense, what it means is like if every person is a whole world. And so it's not just like I'm one of billions of people and like, what is this little thing that I do matter, right? What does it matter if I eat this thing or if I go to this place or if I make this choice or whatever it is? It's much more of like, we are part of a whole, and this whole is extremely important to God, right? There's like the macrocosmic and the microcosmic level, and all of this is like this puzzle that God is putting together and saying like, you are essential in my mission for the world. Every single person, we're like indispensable, right? If every person is like, the Jewish people are compared to like one body and we're all just like a different part, you would never say like, my pinky, I don't really care about my pinky, you can take that, right? Like it doesn't matter. We value our whole body as a whole. We need all of it to function well. And it's the same thing where God is like, I need your piece in creation. I need your actions. I need your talents. I need what you bring to the table, what you bring to the world. So very powerful message. And that just gets us to practical application number 7 to finish off our class. Maddie, do you want to read that for us? You have the handout. Let's see. I don't know. It looks like Maddie might be frozen. Are we all frozen?
Yeah, it could be sometimes when Zoom gets overwhelmed, it gets weird, and there's a lot of people on Zoom.
All right. Maybe Zoom is overwhelmed.
We can hear you now, though. We're not overwhelmed.
Because we're at the like last piece of our class today. Okay. Rhea, do you want to read that for us? Oop. There we go. Go ahead.
More choices do not necessarily lead to more happiness. In fact, it often leads to anxiety and depression. Perhaps this is because if we can choose to do whatever we wish, this means that our choices do not truly matter. Boaz and Ruth teach us that the focus of life is not choices, but responsibility. Furthermore, our actions truly matter. When we realize this, we become happier and more fulfilled, for we do not see our obligation as a burden of limitation, but as a privilege.
Thank you. Okay. There we go. All right. So with that, Adrian has a question. Let's see. Adrian.
So that my middle name and Hebrew name is Ruth.
Oh, I'm so happy. I was wondering, I'm like, do we have any Ruths in the room? I didn't know.
Do.
I love it. Every single class, we had Miriam's, we had a Tzipporah, now we have a Ruth. Remind me who was Robin, you were Tzipporah? You are Tzipporah? Was it Robin? You're there?
Yep, I'm Zipporah,
You're
which
Zipporah.
means, and my name is Robin, and Zipporah means little bird.
Right, right.
There's,
I never realized that would be like the English to Hebrew. I love it.
There's a longer story that I'll tell you another time.
Okay.
There's a whole story behind that name.
Love it.
Good story.
Good story. Love it. Yeah. So I love it that we had like all three every time we had a class. Okay. My pleasure, Maddie. All right. Does anyone, so that will finish off Ruth, and we'll do another woman next week, and then we'll start a new series, but on a different topic. Even though we could do women forever because there's so many amazing personalities. Does anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself before we sign off for today. Anything?
You have a Naomi here too.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. We do. I love that.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was trying to figure out who is your mom.
Oh, my mom just put in the chat, loved your class. Thank you, Mom. She's there is Tamar Green.
Ah, okay. I wasn't sure who she was, but that's
Tamar
so
Green.
lovely.
A little bit there. She's waving. A little bit of a dark video, so it's hard to see you, Mom. But and Rita has an Aunt Ruth of blessed memory. Yeah. So Ruth is very special. And kind of like I mentioned that the more I learn about each of the Jewish women, I get like a different you'll help me out with this, Jolie, because you're good with words, but like a different like flavor of what they were. And like this, the way I think of Miriam as like bold and power and like fearless and just like, right. I think of Ruth as much more demure and like the modesty and the dignity, like much more of maybe a private person, but very like a lot of conviction and like inner strength and like, this is what I want. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. I love the sweet mother-in-law, daughter-in-law back and forth that we see in the story of Ruth. I think that also is just like very telling. Anyway, so
you know what? Ruth's the word Ruth is a word in English now, and it means compassion. And so the word ruthless means without compassion.
Ah, interesting.
Oh. So ruthless, oh my gosh, I never made that connection. I didn't know Ruth itself was a word. I know ruthless, but I never thought of Ruth.
I wanted to also add that it's so amazing to hear how strong all these women were, even Ruth being demure, or just what you said, knowing what she wants, knowing what she's about, having such conviction. And all these biblical women were so strong. It's that feminine energy that just makes you feel really proud to be the feminine. It's really
100%.
amazing.
I agree. And I agree. This series is really bringing this home for me, because I think when we first read the Torah when we're young, or we're told stories, or we see them on the TV or movies, the women are very subservient. It's a different interpretation altogether. So this is really fantastic.
It's only men actually that are usually ever, from my experience of Judaism, it was only ever men talked about. So there's also something, Adina, about do you know the book The Red Tent?
Yeah.
Who's the woman? I'm confused again about who it is. Who is that about?
I don't like that book, but
I don't like it either.
Who was it?
Jacob's wives.
Dinah.
Right.
Dinah, daughter of Jacob. Dinah, who was raped by Shechem.
Right. So Dinah was Joseph and all his brothers' sister.
Yeah. But
see, I never even knew that she.
Fascinating personality. Do you want to do her next week? I didn't decide who we should do next week because
we did her already.
Curious.
We did her already.
Oh, did we? Oh, I just never even knew growing up that there was a sister in that whole family, because it was always Joseph and his 12 and the brothers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a famous story, the one about Dinah. But by the way, I love her person. I mean, I love everyone, but I love her personality. She's got so much character and so much to learn from her.
Do you have any notes on that previous class that you did about Dinah?
Probably, yeah. Let me look it up and then I can send it to you.
Amazing. Okay, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm Scottish.
Okay.
Someone's asking me, Sarah. Bye.
Okay, and Matt. Wait, sorry, Adrian, you had your hand raised. Let's see. see. Trying to unmute you. You might have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
I think the role Naomi plays is very interesting because she's very, you could see like why Ruth has confidence in going with her because she really takes care of her.
Yeah.
And she just one that knows how to do it within that culture and set of rules.
Yeah. Like really what we could even do, I mean, you could technically do a separate class on Naomi, or even in this class, there's like Ruth and her personality and Naomi and her personality, right? And like the things, the choices she made and the things that she does, and like bring out what her character is in that too. You're right. I focus on Ruth in this class, but absolutely, I think that it like clearly, and I think even like that question that some of you had at the end, or near the end, right, about like, why was it kind of attributing Ruth's son to Naomi? I think it's like I think even Ruth attributes her son to Naomi. It was like because of Naomi that, right? Naomi was the shadchan, right? She was the one who was like the great union, like, and even like Ruth, her whole life was her mother-in-law, right? It was like, she obviously saw so much greatness and so much righteousness in her mother-in-law that, that's what inspired her to be like, I'm going to leave Moab. I'm staying with my mother-in-law. She like, no matter what, she didn't care whether she would end up, you know, marrying someone who was so great, or whether she would have any wealth in her life. Like that didn't matter to her. What mattered to her is being like, I want to follow in the path of my mother-in-law. I want to be with her. I want to like be in her shadow, which is clearly a testament to Naomi. Absolutely.
Something similar happened in my life where my brother's wife actually converted because of my mother.
Wow.
The example of my mother. Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since they were already divorced when she did it.
Wow. Yeah. Clearly your mother.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions before we finish for today?
No, thank you.
My pleasure. All right. If you guys have any requests for I didn't decide yet who we'll do next week. So if you have any requests, you can email them to me, send it my way, take it into account. If not, I will surprise you all. I'll send you a handout in an email, and I will see you all next week. Have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you.
My pleasure.